Chapter 8 covers pronouns. Now, it's a fairly complicated, extensive chapter, but the good news is a lot of the elements of this chapter are a review of the concepts that we covered in Chapter 7 with the subject and subject-verb agreement. So much of this lecture is just going to remind you of those rules that we discussed in Chapter 7. So in this lecture, I'm going to talk to you about three things. First, pronoun case, and I will explain what that is. Second, pronoun antecedent agreement, and that is the largest portion of this lecture, and it's the part that really parallels the rules that we talked about in Chapter 7 with subject-verb agreement. And the final thing I'm going to talk to you about are pronoun reference errors. So first, to talk about pronoun case. There are three kinds of pronoun case: subjective, objective, and possessive. And basically that means what is the pronoun doing in the sentence. So subjective pronouns fulfill the subject of the sentence. They are doing the action of the sentence. They come at the beginning of the sentence. So for example, we have John and blank made some cookies. This is the subject of the sentence, so when you're trying to decide which pronoun goes in this blank, you have to choose the subjective pronoun. The easiest way to determine this is to cover up the other half of the compound subject and ask yourself what would go in that blank. Would you say, I made cookies or me made cookies? Obviously you would say, I made cookies, and that is the subjective pronoun, so the correct version of this sentence is John and I made cookies. Now, again, the second kind of pronoun case is objective. That means that the pronoun is the object of the sentence. The verb is happening to the pronoun. Those are going to be found usually at the end of the sentence. When you're trying to determine which pronoun to use, again, cover up the other half of the combination, of the compound element. So I have, we gave them to Chris and blank. Would you say we gave them to she or we gave them to her? Again, her sounds correct in that usage, and that is correct because her is the objective pronoun. So the correct version of this sentence is we gave them to Chris and her. It sounds kind of awkward then, so again, you can't just trust your ear. You have to cover up that other half and then ask yourself what sounds correct. Possessive pronouns we'll talk more about in class, but those are the pronouns that show ownership, like her, his, its, their, etc. Okay, moving on. We're going to talk now about pronoun antecedent agreement. You need to know this term. So antecedent is the noun that the pronoun replaces in the sentence, because that's the function of a pronoun, to take the place of the noun. So in this sentence right here, we is the pronoun that's referring to John and I. Instead of repeating John and I gave them, I used this pronoun instead. So the antecedent of this pronoun is John and I. That is the noun that this pronoun is replacing. So that's really important that you know this word so that when we talk about pronoun antecedent agreement, you know what that means. Pronouns and antecedents have to agree in number, just like subject-verb agreement. So singular pronouns have singular antecedents. They need to agree in perspective, which is what we're going to talk about next, first, second, and third person. And finally, they need to agree in gender. So if you have a female antecedent, you need a female pronoun. Male antecedent needs a male pronoun. So let's talk about perspective. Pronouns are divided, and really, your writing can be divided into three different perspectives. So you can take the first person perspective, which means you are talking about yourself from your personal point of view. The pronouns that are first person, and this is not an exhaustive list, but some of them are me, we, us, I. So I'm talking about myself or other people and me. The second person is when you're talking directly to your reader, using you or your. And third person perspective is when you're talking about other people. So third person pronouns are he, she, they, and it. We'll talk more about this in class, but most academic writing is going to use third person pronouns. It's never going to use second person, and it's rarely going to use first person. So this is the world you're going to be living in when it comes to writing academically. You have to be consistent when you're writing. You can't switch from first to second to third person for no reason. You have to have a reason to make that shift. And again, in academic writing, you usually want to avoid second and third person. Okay, so now let's talk more about pronoun antecedent agreement, and much of what I'm about to cover is going to sound like a review because these concepts are the same from subject-verb agreement. Okay, remember from chapter 7, indefinite pronouns are those words that are not referring to anyone in particular. They're referring to an indefinite person or an indefinite group of people. So most indefinite pronouns are going to be singular, even though they sound like they're plural. So words like everybody, anyone, everything, anything, those words sound like they're talking about a group of people, but technically they're talking about everybody or anybody or no one. So anytime an indefinite pronoun has every or one in part of the word, it's going to be singular. When it comes to pronoun antecedent agreement, that means you would say everybody needs to bring his or her homework. You would not say everybody needs to bring their homework because there is a plural pronoun. You have to make sure the pronoun matches the antecedent in terms of number and gender. There are some indefinite pronouns that are plural, like many, few, or several. And that makes sense. Those sound like groups of people. So if you were using these antecedents, the pronouns that would go with these would be they or their, because these are plural words. Now, there are a few pronouns that can be singular or can be plural, and it depends on the context of the sentence. So remember that if it's referring to a plural noun, like all of the children, some of the children, children is a plural noun, so that means these indefinite pronouns would be plural. If it's referring to something that you can't count, like water or grain, then it would be singular. So you would say, some of the children lost their shoes, because children is plural. Or you would say, some of the soda has lost its carbonation, because it is singular. So it depends on the context of the sentence. With compound antecedents, and again, this is the same rule that we talked about in the verb chapter. If the antecedent is joined with and, like dogs and cats, or a dog and a cat, because it's joined with and, it's going to be plural, and we'll go with the pronoun they or their. The dogs and cats lost their toys. Their matches and is in agreement with dogs and cats because it's plural, since it has the and. When the compound element is joined with or, just like was the case with subject-verb agreement, the pronoun, or excuse me, the antecedent that's closer to the pronoun dictates whether the pronoun should be singular or plural. So if I have a doctor or the nurses, if the pronoun is closer to nurses, you would use they. If the pronoun was closer to doctor, that's singular, so you would say his or her, or he or she. Just like the subject-verb agreement, when they're joined with or, nor, not only, but also, the one that's closer to the pronoun dictates the number in terms of whether it's singular or plural, dictates the gender, whether it's feminine or masculine. With collective nouns, they not only are singular, but they also are things. And as a review, collective nouns are those words that refer to groups of people, like family, jury, class. It's a group of people, but it's acting as a unit, so it's singular, and it's a thing. So the pronoun that goes with these words is it or its. The class took its midterm. Class is a singular thing. The jury made its decision. Singular thing, not their. Jury is referring to a unit working as a cohesive group, so it would be its instead of their. So that's the rule with collective nouns. It's singular and it's a thing, so the pronoun that goes with it is it or its. With regard to gender, he or she is singular. Their or they is plural. If your antecedent is singular and you don't know if it's male or female, like doctor, politician, anybody, somebody, that could be a man or it could be a woman. So in that case, you have to use this kind of awkward pronoun, which is he or she, or his or her. So for example, the doctor looked in his or her notebook. If you don't know if the doctor is a man or a woman, you have to say his or her. Every doctor must get his or her degree prior to practicing medicine. The doctor could be a man, it could be a woman. You can see how that could potentially get really awkward in an essay if you have he or she, his or her sprinkled throughout the entire thing. An easy way, not necessarily an easy, but one approach to fixing this potential awkwardness is to change your antecedent and make it plural. So talk about doctors instead, because their and they is gender neutral. It could be male, it could be female. So instead of saying a doctor must get his or her degree, you can say doctors must get their degree. And that way you cut down on some of that awkwardness and can be more concise in your writing, which is always a goal. Okay, the final thing that I want to talk to you about today are pronoun reference errors. There are 3. These are mistakes that people often make in their pronoun usage, and there's 3 kinds. There's the ambiguous pronoun, the vague pronoun, and the repetitive pronoun. All 3 of these are problems, and on your exam you're going to need to be able to identify and correct them. In your essays, you need to eliminate them as well. So ambiguous means the pronoun could reference 2 different antecedents in the sentence, and the reader can't tell which one it's referencing. So for example, John gave Brad his clothes. This pronoun is ambiguous because I don't know, is his referring to Brad or is it referring to John? Did John give Brad John's clothes or did John give Brad Brad's clothes? So much of writing is about making your ideas clear to the reader, and this is confusing. Your reader doesn't know the meaning you're trying to convey, so it's a problem. When you have an ambiguous pronoun, what you need to do is replace the pronoun with the noun, John gave Brad John's clothes, which is not great writing either, or rearrange the sentence to where you get rid of the error. So for example, John gave his clothes to Brad. Then I know that the his is referring to John. And in class we'll practice ways to fix these errors. A vague pronoun error means there is no antecedent in the paragraph or in the sentence. I don't know who the pronoun is referring to. So for example, they said they would fix the potholes. Well, who is they? Who is going to fix the potholes? I don't know who that is referring to. It's vague because I don't know what the antecedent of that word is. The way you fix this error is you simply replace the pronoun with the actual noun. So the Department of Transportation said they would fix the potholes. Then there's no confusion. I know exactly who you're talking about. Finally, repetitive pronoun error occurs when you have the antecedent directly next to the pronoun. Remember, the purpose of the pronoun is to replace the noun, not to be next to the noun. So for example, the pie, it was delicious. It is referring to the pie. There's no point in listing them both. It should replace the pie. So when you have this error where you're just repeating yourself, the easy way to fix it, it's a very simple correction, is just to get rid of the pronoun and have the pie was delicious. So pronouns there's a lot to them, and you use them often in your writing. So there's a lot of potential for error here, but there's just a few rules, and again, if you master the rules for both subject-verb agreement, then you'll master those for pronoun antecedent agreement as well.